Hi everybody, thanks for connecting with me again today. I hope that you're doing good. So this week we're going to talk about some really good life lessons that we can learn from Jesus by observing his lifestyle. Life lessons we can learn by observing his lifestyle. So we've talked in the past about how in first century Israel, if a person wanted to study theology, they didn't go to a place, to an institution. They went to a person, right? Much different from our education system today. If you want to go to U of T to study, whatever. In the first century in Israel, you went to a person, and that person was called a rabbi. And the thing that made that system different from what we do today is that, part of your education was learning the knowledge that the rabbi knew, learning, teaching you stuff. But an even bigger part of the education was learning from the life of the rabbi. The students spent a lot of time walking around and just living with the rabbi, with the teacher, and they just observed his life. And they learned from the life of the rabbi. Okay, so it was way more than just teach me stuff, intellectual knowledge. It was let me learn from your life, right? So Jesus, of course, came and positioned himself as a rabbi, not an official kind of rabbi, but he very much positioned himself, as a rabbi. And so, for us to just learn the teaching of Jesus, the head knowledge of Jesus is one part of what we want to learn, but even more so we want to learn from the life of Jesus. Okay, so here's an example. 2 weeks ago, I think we talked about Matthew chapter 6. And in Matthew 6, verse 34, Jesus said, "Therefore, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Do you remember we talked about that a couple weeks ago? And if we isolate just verse 34, then it might sound like a commandment, like stop it, don't do it. Remember we talked about stop it. Stop it, don't do it, don't worry, right? If we isolate verse 34. But remember we said that that sentence begins with therefore, which ties it back to the previous things that Jesus said. So if we learn from Jesus and what he had to say in Matthew chapter 6 about our relationship with our stuff, with material things, Jesus was teaching us to have a positive attitude towards our material things. Don't grasp at things. Don't give it too much priority. Just hold it lightly. Hold it with an open hand. And part of that in verse 1 of Matthew 6, he said, be willing to share your stuff. Again, having an open posture, open hand, towards our stuff. And then in verse 33 of Matthew 6, Jesus said to seek first the kingdom of God. And so this is very much something that Jesus modeled, right? And so now, if we put that together with verse 34, again, have an open attitude, an open posture towards your stuff. Don't grasp for stuff. Don't give it too much emphasis. Be willing to share your stuff and seek first the kingdom of God. And therefore, the benefit of that kind of an attitude is you don't have to worry about your things, right? And so you see, when we put it in the context, the larger context of what Jesus was saying, and the larger context of what Jesus modeled in his life, then verse 34 takes a much different, we see it in a much different light, right? Because it's not like a command, don't do it, stop it, don't worry. It's no, this is the benefit of this kind of a lifestyle. Okay, so just kind of hold that thought that what Jesus was really doing, and yes, he was teaching us information, knowledge, but also what he was really doing was showing us a new way of life, a new lifestyle based on the lifestyle that we, have observed from him. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 11, Matthew chapter 11. And Jesus says in the New Living Translation, actually today I'm going to refer to 3 different translations, the New Living Translation, the Message, and the NIV. But anyways, in the New Living Translation says that Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. Okay, let's begin by just quickly talking about this issue, this image of a yoke. What is a yoke? Well, we know that a yoke is something that, is put on animals, oxen or horses or donkeys or whatever, to pull a cart or to pull a plow. It's that apparatus that goes around their shoulders. Would you call that for oxen or whatever? So it's a working thing that they would pull, a wagon or whatever, or a plow, right? It's a working thing, an animal yoke. But the image in first century Israel of a religious yoke was very common. For us it sounds weird, but for Jewish people in the first century it was very common. In fact, rabbis, that we talked about at the beginning here, it was very common for rabbis to talk about taking on the yoke of the law. Taking on the yoke of the law. So in other words, accepting the burden that it is to try to live a pure and blameless life, and recognizing that it's hard, but accept the burden, accept the yoke of living a pure and blameless life, right? And in Matthew 23 verse 4, Jesus is talking about those rabbis, those religious leaders, when he said, they crush people with unbearable religious demands and never lift a finger to ease the burden. So putting it in the same language, they crush people with unbearable yokes, unbearable religious yokes, religious demands that they have to accept and try to pull along, right? But Jesus comes along, and he says, again in verse 28 of Matthew 11, come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens. So in other words, come to me, you who are weary and carry heavy burdens of the religious laws. That's directly what Jesus is talking about, the religious laws that other rabbis try to put on you. Come to me and I will give you rest, right? I love the Message translation of this. In Matthew 11, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I love that line. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Man, I love that. That just so captures the heart of what Jesus was talking about. Okay, let's finish up by talking about something that Jesus says in the middle. And it's a sentence that I think is easily and often overlooked in something that Jesus said. When Jesus said, learn from me. Let me read again from Matthew 11:29, but this time from the NIV. Jesus saying, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. What was Jesus saying here? Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Remember, going back to our beginning, remember that rabbis didn't just teach information, learn this, 2 + 2 = 4. They weren't just teaching information, but they were showing a way of life. They were displaying a new lifestyle. They were learning from their lifestyle. And Jesus came along and absolutely taught people with the way that he lived. And here Jesus says directly, learn from me. But more specifically, he says, in this area of carrying a heavy religious yoke and carrying the burden of trying your best to do right and to do good, and in this specifically, learn from my life and learn from my gentleness and humility. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Okay, so again, Jesus isn't just saying, learn this information. He's saying, learn from my life. Okay, so here's the question that I think we'll chat about on Sunday when we get together. What do we learn about the life of Jesus, particularly in his gentleness and humility? What do we learn? Where do we see this displayed in Jesus's life? And how, if we were to adopt that kind of an attitude, how would it make it, well, in the words of Jesus, how would I find rest for my soul? There you go. How would I find rest for my soul if I learn from the gentleness and humility that Jesus showed me? Okay, and where do we see that in Jesus's life? Okay, so 3 things that I want to highlight here. First of all, I see in Jesus a very clear willing acceptance of the Father's will. Remember, Jesus relied heavily on God the Father, right? The Holy Trinity is a relationship, 3 different people, but intertwined. However, I'm just, anyways, destroying my Trinity theology there. But anyways, Jesus depended on his Father, his loving Father, right? And he submitted to the Father's will. In Matthew 26, verse 67, speaking of when Jesus was being crucified, when he was being killed, says that they spit in his face and struck him with their fist. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you?" Right? So of course, just highlighting the terrible abuse that Jesus took. And every one of us would want to rise up and defend ourselves, right? And fight back against that. But 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 23 in the NIV says that when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats, right? So Jesus is subjected to terrible injustice, anything that any one of us would want to fight back against and try to protect ourselves against. It's just natural to want to do that. But Jesus willingly accepted. When they hurled their insults, he didn't retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. And so just this example, this life example, and more than just the crucifixion, but of Jesus's willing acceptance of the will of the Father. So here's the question. How would my willing acceptance of the will of the Father help me to find rest for my soul? Because that's really the question, right? Take my yoke upon you, and you'll find rest for your soul, right? How would my willing acceptance of the will of the Father, help me find rest for my soul? So much of the burden that we feel, the burden of, trying to live a good life or whatever, so much of it, I think, is self-imposed because we try to, we fight for our rights and we try to fight for what we want, right? But if we learned from Jesus in his willing acceptance of the Father, and just, I'm not fighting for my rights, I'm not fighting for what I want. Jesus, I'm just submitting to you. Father, I'm just submitting to you. And I think that when we adopt that kind of an attitude that we learn from the life of Jesus, then I think we truly find rest for our soul. The struggle that we feel is the struggle of our human nature to want it the way that I want it, and get what I want. So first of all, I see Jesus, his willing acceptance of the Father and how it, gives us rest. The second thing that I see is just the place of a servant that Jesus took. In Matthew 20, it says, Jesus speaking here, whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus showed us a beautiful, perfect picture of what it means to be a servant, right? So again, the question, how would learning from the life of Jesus, how would, taking the place of a servant and an attitude of a servant, how would that help me to find rest for my soul? I think that there is great freedom, tremendous freedom in saying, Jesus, I'm not the most important person in the room, right? I am not number one. I am a servant to others. I'm here to help others. I'm here to serve others. And Jesus, ultimately, I'm not the most important person in the room. I am a servant of yours. And friends, again, similar to my first thought, but I just feel like so much of the angst that we feel is fighting for our rights and fighting against, serving and fighting against, being a servant. But if we could just lay that down, and if we could just submit to the will of the Father, if we could take the place of a servant, I just think that is such a huge, it goes so far in finding rest for our souls. Let me just quickly finish with one more that I think is super important. The tremendous inner strength that we see from Jesus. And remember, meekness is not weakness. Meekness is not weakness. Matthew 12 says, referring to Jesus, he will not fight or shout or raise his voice in public. He will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. So Jesus didn't come, yelling and fighting and you better, you have to do this, you have to do this. No, he came in quiet strength, right? And then it goes on to say, finally, he will cause justice to be victorious, and his name will be the hope of all the world, right? Friends, again, I say it, meekness is not weakness. Jesus didn't come yelling and screaming and, listen to me, kind of thing. No, he came with a quiet strength, but don't miss it. He came with strength, because it finishes by saying, finally, he will cause justice to be victorious, right? Jesus showed tremendous inner strength. So again, the question, how would that kind of inner strength help me to find rest for my soul? Friends, being a follower of Jesus is not for the faint of heart, right? It is not for the faint of heart. Thinking of an old book that we read when our children were young, Parenting is Not for Cowards, and it's such a great title. And in the same way, I say that being a follower of Jesus is not for cowards. It's not for the faint of heart. Being a follower of Jesus requires tremendous inner fortitude. But the beauty of it and the miracle of it is that it's not an inner strength that we provide, right? When we are weak, then he is strong. That the miracle and the beauty of this is that when we submit to Jesus, when we come to Jesus and we say, I'm not the most important person in the room, I'm here to serve you. When we come to Jesus and we submit, we willingly submit to his will, we take that step towards him, then Jesus comes and he pours into our lives his strength and his peace and his love and his glory. Like, he pours into our lives. So it's not our strength, but it's his strength. And all of that, mixes in, when I say that parenting is not for cowards, but being a follower of Jesus is not for cowards, but it's not, and it requires tremendous inner strength, but it's not our strength, it's strength that he gives to us. And therein, friends, lies the miracle, lies the mystery of being a follower of Jesus. So, oh my goodness, look at the time. I've gone long again today. Sorry about that. But I think we'll have a really good conversation, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Okay, God bless you, friends. Have a great day.